Welcome to Coffee with Gish. Please give this a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more videos. Today I'm going to talk about LDS apologetics and what I think are some of the failures of LDS apologetics. I don't think it's unfair to say that LDS apologetics is in a state of crisis, and the apologists and those who support them scramble around looking for ways to come up with a better way to do apologetics. Some of them are more successful than others. But how did we get here? How did we get in a place where apologetics seem to be flailing around and in need of help? Sometimes in need of help from their greatest critics. As I've mentioned in past videos, and it is really a surprise to no one, when all of this new information flooded the internet, it seemed to validate arguments that critics of Mormonism had been making for decades, if not over a century. And LDS claims didn't seem like they were holding up too well. The usual answers that had been given in the past were no longer convincing. And I think that as much as anything, it was the scale of the challenge. Everybody had access to the information. Everybody could check the sources and claims of critics of the LDS Church in the past. And things didn't really look good for the LDS Church. Another thing that happened is that when Mormon apologetics hit the cyber age, it was really an older generation of apologists who had to meet that challenge. These weren't people who grew up online, who grew up under the scrutiny of hundreds of thousands of people in the public eye, or maybe we can dial that back a bit and say tens of thousands of people in the public eye. So they brought the skills that they had honed from dealing with anti-cult ministry people, liberal Mormons in the past, like people who go to Sunstone symposia, etc., etc. And they just continued that same behavior when they were operating in a completely new environment. And I think it didn't really work, because some of the things that they did in print and venues like the Farms Review of Books, they were really came off as being kind of nasty, lampooning books or lampooning people. Sometimes people who were sincere, sure, you don't have to agree with them. I think for me, the big case is John L. Brooke, who was a historian who wrote this book on the influence of Western esotericism on Mormonism, and who was hit with all of these negative book reviews from LDS scholar apologists from BYU, so much so that he kind of stayed away from Mormonism in the future, which I think is a big shame. So yeah, you didn't have a lot of nimbleness or nuance in apologetic approaches to defending the LDS Church in the online environment today. And that's a shame, really, because I think in the end it probably contributed to a number of people leaving the church. They would see some of these apologists in action online, and they would say, to heck with it, man. This can't be right. This can't be true. If these answers are poor, if the people giving them are behaving in a nasty way, I don't want to deal with this anymore myself. I'm just sick of it. And I think you did see some attrition, and have seen some attrition. Some people who leave the church partly because the apologetics that they're reading don't work, and the people who are dealing in them, the people who are doing the apologetics, are sometimes very unpleasant people to deal with. But this isn't to say that LDS apologetics was caught totally flat-footed and didn't make any strides in using technology to their advantage. I just don't think, at the end of the day, they really saw themselves as others see them. Nevertheless, I want to give some credit to them for the things that they did well. One of the things that I think they did well is flash mobbing. And I saw this, there was a Time piece online, Time magazine. They had this Mountain West photography exhibit online that showed people in Mormon country, in a poverty-stricken part of Mormon country. And I remember suddenly all of these LDS apologists showed up to this Time photography exhibit and started raising a ruckus, claiming that the photographer had tried to misrepresent and insult, in a sense, the Mormon people by making them look like a bunch of Appalachian rubes wandering around in their overalls and bare feet. And it wasn't just one apologist. There was a whole bunch of them that were doing this at once. Now, I don't know about you, but if I arrived at this online exhibit by Time magazine, and suddenly saw all of these LDS apologists going berserk in the comments, I would think that they'd lost their minds. And honestly, even as a person who knew them, I could see immediately that this was going to be a counterproductive way of dealing with the issue. That, while it might have a point to it, it's really, not a good look. Really not a good look. Now, these flash mobs still operate today, and so you might be somewhere online, and Mormonism will be on the discussion list, and maybe some of the things that are discussed aren't very flattering. Hey you. See, this is what I deal with when I'm at home. We got someone who wants attention. And whatever's being said isn't going to be too flattering. And then all of a sudden you'll see a bunch of commenters, new participants who flood in, and they're either saying really two-dimensional affirming things about the LDS Church, or they're attacking the people who they believe are saying negative things. And again, this is kind of weird, right? And there's got to be a better way of doing this, because I don't know about you, but if I'm involved in an online discussion and suddenly you get a bunch of what I consider to be kind of garbage responses that don't really engage, but rather seem to be all about just stopping any conversation from happening. This kind of trolling is really the garbage that fills the internet. And I don't like garbage, right? I really don't. I don't like garbage. And even, I have to admit that on discussmormonism.com, there are certain threads that I'll avoid because they're not of interest to me. And, now it's kind of curious, and I have to wonder whether this approach has been refined over time, this flash mobbing, because I think that in the past it's been a go-to way of dealing with criticism, especially when the apologists are outmanned, that instead of trying to answer any questions, they're just out there to scuttle conversation. They're just there to make sure that serious questions aren't addressed. And we saw this on discussmormonism.com. Back in the day, it was MDB. You'd have even really prominent apologists come onto the board and just spray their nonsense. And it's weird because you think, well, I know this person is really intelligent and learned, and yet this is not by any stretch of the imagination, a productive conversation. But then I learned later that, the sort of trolling guerrilla tactics of commenting were on purpose. That this was one way of trying to keep all of this criticism of the LDS Church in check. And maybe in the short run, that was okay. I mean, a necessity, because apologetic resources were overrun. Now, these days, what appears to be the case is that, okay, so some years ago there was a new effort launched called the More Good Foundation. And the More Good Foundation specialized in doing this kind of stuff. Now, it seemed to happen for a while that you'd have people from the More Good Foundation pop in, cause a ruckus, cause a scene, scuttle conversation. And, when you've got a mass of anonymous trolls who are doing this stuff, I think the tendency is to just want to leave altogether. And I actually think that that's what this was about. It was about destroying fora, destroying online conversation. I found it very distasteful. To this day, I find it extremely distasteful, despite the fact that I know that a lot of criticisms of the LDS Church are similarly frustrating, spinning wheels, revisiting the same topics over and over and over again, lampooning the same things. There's a kind of critical autoeroticism involved here, where we're just kind of going after the same problems again and again and again, not really seeking answers, but just sort of reaffirming the critic's position that the church isn't true and that they're not obligated to practice Mormonism anymore. And by golly, doesn't it feel good to come to a place, to come to a discussion board where you can reiterate how bad the church is for the 10,000th time in your life. And people do. They post the same stuff over and over and over and over again, to the point of being kind of obsessive. Am I guilty of some of the same? Well, yeah, sure. But I try to control myself. I try to stay away from unproductive conversations. And yet, I think there's a difference here. And this is the difference. These individual critics of the church, they're just random online person with a beef with the LDS Church. And in a sense, I think some of the criticizing that happens, or the lampooning that happens, is ugly, to the point that the people doing that stuff are, in a sense, delegitimizing themselves from the unreasonableness and obsessiveness of their own criticisms and insults and lampoons. But the church has a bigger stake in the situation. The outcome matters a lot more for the church as an organization. It has a lot further reaching consequences for its own membership if the impression that people have when they see apologists online is going to be a negative one. All right. Now, it's true that there's people want to see some fighting back, some red meat, and especially, I think these days, it's true. People find a simple kind of atavistic or visceral pleasure in just, putting up their dukes and going at it and protecting their interests in this way. But I think that in the long run, it's destructive. I don't care where it's happening. I think it's destructive. And we need to increase or elevate the discourse and really think about the meaning of what we stand for and what we believe and why it's important, instead of just providing two-dimensional nonsense that litters the online world. Now, there's a blog that I like to visit, written by a fellow named David Armstrong, who's an ancient literature scholar, and who's also a Christian. And I have to say, David Armstrong's writings, his blogs, are so much better than anything I've read, either by critics or apologists, or most times just anybody who's writing on LDS topics at all, I'm sorry to say. But I think this has something to do, of course, with my own preferences. Here's a person who's schooled in ancient literature and rhetoric, who understands what an effective apologia is, and isn't even really trying to perform apologia, but is rather exploring meaning, Western civilization, with the benefit of pretty powerful erudition, lots of learning informing what he does. And I kind of wish, I said, where's the LDS David Armstrong? I don't think the LDS David Armstrong exists. I'd love to see one. I know that I think you might put Terrell Givens closer to that category of person, and certainly I think he's done some really impressive work, but it could just be me liking the classical version more, or the version that brings antiquity to bear more frequently than Givens does, that makes me like this more. I read this stuff and I think, wow, this is what I want to see. This is an apologetic in itself, because the depth, the sophistication, and really the spiritual uplift I get from reading that is the polar opposite of what I'm seeing in LDS apologetics. So let's knock it off, guys. Let's knock off the flash mobbing that floods silly two-dimensional negative insults or testimonials that almost look like self-caricatures at people. Let's not have another Time Lightbox event. Find a different way, because this is really annoying. I feel like a serious concern about the quality and nature of LDS apologetics online. I think that an apologia is a fine thing. A defense, apologetics, it's a fine thing to do. But I think how it's done matters a whole lot. Don't blow it. This is Coffee with Kish. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.